What's good, y'all? StudioSounds.com back with a brand new tutorial. In this tutorial, I'll be breaking down a beat that I made that kind of has that Wiz Khalifa type vibe. I was kind of aiming to get something that I can kind of feel would fit into the Cushion Orange Juice mixtape. But then when I kind of had that, I tried to update it a little bit to kind of what's going on today, and I added a little vocal sample on top of it to make it a little bit more melodic. So that's the beat I'll be breaking down for you guys today. All the sounds of this beat you can find at StudioSounds.com, including this massive preset bank. And you guys will be able to download a demo of this bank over there as well. That's going to include all the sounds I'm going to be using in this actual tutorial. So let's jump into the next section and get started on this beat. So the first sound that I'll be using is it's actually a bell sound, and it's called the retro chime synth. And I'm gonna go ahead and set the BPM to 145, so just slightly quicker than kind of standard. And we're gonna basically play one chord for this whole thing with just one note added throughout it, just to kind of switch it up a little bit. So the first chord, or actually kind of the main chord that you're gonna be playing, is gonna be, you're gonna start with F, A, C sharp. So you have this. And then what we're going to do with this is we're going to kind of build a little bit of a pattern with this, right? So when I kind of think of that Cushion OJ sound, I think of it, they have a lot of just these little kind of chords and different things in there that just kind of repeat and build kind of the bounce, and then they kind of build the beats around that. So that's kind of how I think of it. So when I'm using kind of EPs, pianos, keyboards, bells, or whatever I'm using, I try to kind of get some kind of rhythm going with them, rather than just kind of playing the standard just one chord, wait, two chord, you know, that kind of thing. So try to give them a little bit of bounce. But anyway, so once we have that, we're going to go ahead and take the same chord. We can actually make this a little bit easier on ourselves. You can just go ahead and select it, or you could just select it by holding Control, select it. And then what you want to do is hold Shift. You want to hold Shift, and then you can just go ahead and drag where you want the next one to be. So we're going to go ahead and just change the timing on this. Kind of stack this one in this way. And then basically over here you're going to actually go ahead and repeat the same thing. So you can go ahead and just select it and then drag it one more time. And let's go ahead and just listen to this before we make any changes to it. Okay, so we have that kind of sound. Now what I want to do is I want to keep kind of the simplicity and the airiness of that and kind of how that sounds, but I want to make it just slightly more dramatic over here on this little second section. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and copy this note right here. I'm going to hold Shift, drag it over, and then we're going to go ahead and just drag it up one note. And basically this isn't going to be your kind of perfect triad chord. You're adding kind of an extra note in there, which is going to sour it up a little bit and just kind of make this little second section seem slightly more tense. So let's go ahead and play this now. So now you have kind of the light airiness of this sound. It still has kind of obviously that minor feel, but then when you add this, you kind of have that tension, and then it kind of resolves over here, so it just kind of sounds good to the ear. So that was kind of what I was aiming for. So let's go ahead and play it, and I want to just add a slight little strum in here just to go ahead and differentiate the notes a little bit. So let's go ahead and let it play, and then we'll go ahead and pull up the strum tool. So that slight little strum just kind of give you a little bit of a different feel. And I'm kind of happy with that. So this is kind of where I started. So let's jump to the next section and continue. So now the next thing I'll be adding is Chord 3. This bank has a ton of these little chord hits, and you can use these for a ton of different things. Like you can use them for this kind of style. In the past, I've used them for like 21 Savage type beats, just a lot of different stuff. But they just have a cool little vibe, and they help to kind of add that airiness and that kind of almost that kind of sampled chop type feel to it. So we're gonna go ahead and add this real quick to it. Basically just 2 notes. So let's go ahead and lay that in there. Okay, and the 2 notes I used are the F sharp, so basically the root note of the chord, and then I used the C sharp, which is just going to be the top note of the chord. And those are basically just the 2 notes. And let's go ahead and just turn those up. And we can actually just make those maybe just slightly shorter, or just kind of even them out. That's cool like that. But yeah, so this is kind of what I had. So let's jump into the next section. I want to kind of show you guys the effects and what I added to this to kind of give it that sound that you heard in the beat. So now what I'm going to do is I have both of these set to the same effects channel. So on that effects channel, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add a gross beat. And with the gross beat, we're going to click this little arrow up top. We're going to go to the presets, go to momentary, not monetary. And we're going to go to the half speed setting. And this is just going to obviously do what it says. It's going to take this down, pitch it down slightly, and just really slow it down. And that's going to give us a even more dreamy, airy kind of vibe. So let's go ahead and take a listen to what it sounds like with the effect on. And before we do that, let's actually put the effect where it should be on insert 1, not insert 2. So that was my fault. And let's go ahead and take a listen to it now. So now that had that kind of minor type feel, had that nice dreaminess, airiness, and now you could really just come in with a nice lead and complement that. So I kind of had what I wanted from that. And before we move on, the other thing I just did to it was I just put a parametric EQ on it, and I almost kind of treated it almost kind of like a sample, and I just cut a lot of the lows, a lot of the frequencies I didn't need. So let's go ahead and take a listen to it real quick, and I'll do that. And if you didn't catch that, all I did was just kind of cut at around the 250 mark and just cut all the little extra areas I won't need because I want a nice heavy bass sound in this. And I'm going to add more stuff to this where I'm not going to need this to have a low end presence at all. So let's go ahead and jump in the next section and continue. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add this little glider in here, just kind of add a little bit of a more melodic effect and kind of add something that cuts through kind of all the softness of those bells and that chord hit. So I'm going to use glider 04, and I'm going to basically just lay down a couple notes with it. So let's go ahead and lay this down and I'll show you guys what the notes are. So it's actually real simple. I'm gonna want them to be slightly longer, kind of like this. And then this last one we actually want to shorten up, and we want to just go ahead and just turn them up slightly to around the 69-70% range. Okay, so once I had that, I wanted to go ahead and make it slightly more ambient. So what I decided to do was go ahead and layer a nice little pad sound over it as well. So I used PD Dark Mist, which is just a really great ambient pad in this bank that I really love. And all I did was just go ahead and copy the exact same pattern down. So you could just hit Control C, Control V to copy and paste the pattern down. So the next thing I wanted to do was go ahead and add the effects that I needed for this. So the first thing I wanted to use was just a really heavy reverb, just kind of wash the sound out. So we're going to go ahead and turn the size all the way up, and then we're going to go ahead and turn the decay time up to about 3.5 to 4 seconds. We'll kind of just play with it and see what it sounds like. And then we're going to turn the wet level all the way up to 100 to initially kind of have something like this from these two sounds. And without the effect, this is what it sounds like, just basically a lot drier. And with it on, it just helps add a nice ambience to it. So the next thing I want to throw on this is just a delay. Now I'm going to use this delay just to give the sound a little bit of movement and just kind of help it bounce around, just kind of help with the bounce of the track. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure I activate ping pong, so it'll just bounce from speaker to speaker. And then I'll just go ahead and pick a side. Doesn't really matter. I'll just go left to make sure it bounces from side to side. Make sure this set is set to 3 steps, and it usually is at default. And just kind of turn the volume down slightly. Let's go ahead and play that and see what it sounds like. And then the other thing I want to do to that is just add a parametric EQ and just kind of cut any frequencies we don't need. And then I also want to just roll off the top slightly just to make sure it's not as bright, to give it a slightly more lo-fi feel to kind of match the style I'm kind of going for. So I'm going to go ahead and cut a good amount of the low end. Okay, so that gives me a slightly more lo-fi feel, and then also I feel like kind of helps it blend a little bit better with what we have on effects channel 1, and basically just these two sounds, and just kind of helps it blend a little bit better. So I thought that sounded really good. So let's jump to the next section, continue. So the next thing we're going to do is start programming the drums. So how the beat is actually going to come in, it's going to come in over here on pattern 1. Basically as a little intro, and to make a little intro, all we're going to do is just run a little low pass filter, and then we're going to add some transition effects later. But basically initially all it will be is just a low pass filter. So we'll kind of start out like this, and then the way we're going to automate it is we're going to go to the mix level, go to create automation clip, and then with the mix level we're basically just going to go ahead and take it down, and we might be able to even kind of do it like this. So it just kind of fades out over here, and then we have the transition effects, and then over here into pattern 2. Pattern 2 is where we'll probably go ahead and drop the drums. So let's go and set that up. So basically on pattern 2, the first thing I usually start with all my tracks when I'm doing beats lately is always the hi-hat, just to kind of get a groove going. So I have a ton of hats loaded up here. I like to use, well, actually not a ton, but I have 1, 2, 3, 4, I guess 4 different ones. So it's not too crazy, but in some other tutorials you guys will see, I tend to kind of go crazy with the hats lately. And just how many I like to use to kind of stack them and give it more depth and give it more bounce. But anyway, so all of these sounds that you see here came from the Legends Never Die kit from studiosounds.com. So if you need any of these sounds, you can go ahead and pick those up. But what we're going to do is we're going to start with the HH Bell, and we're going to go ahead and just fill each 2 steps, and then we'll just go ahead and go into the pattern, hit Alt and Q to go ahead and quantize this. This is going to help with our bounce and make sure not everything's on the grid. And we're going to use the different MPC settings is what I kind of prefer, and I honestly prefer the MPC 2 setting. And it kind of gives you a little bit of a bounce that kind of moves the notes just slightly off the grid, just to make sure you don't have that super mechanical, no bounce FL Studio type beat that people used to know FL Studio for. Let's go ahead and take a listen to it. So this is kind of what I started off with. And we just want to make sure that we turn that effect off. Okay, so you guys kind of see how the quantize helps with the groove versus just having those standard notes that you usually get. You kind of have this, obviously, Doesn't sound bad, but just doesn't really have much bounce to it. But with this, you get kind of a little bit change up of the velocity, and then obviously it pulls them off the grid ever so slightly. So that was the first hat I had. And then just to kind of accent it, this is usually where I kind of used a lot of different hi-hats. Is I'll have a main hi-hat pattern, then I accent it with a lot of different other patterns. So for this one, what I started off with was this HH wheels hat, and I basically just added 2 notes like this. And then we also want to make sure we quantize these as well. I'll probably just take this down a little bit just because we have the other one hitting at full velocity there, just so they don't kind of interfere. And then I added this little symbol 50s throughout here. And then for this symbol 50s, I actually added a couple of effects to it. Well, actually not a couple. I basically just added a delay to it, just kind of make it slightly more interesting. And this delay, I can't remember if I did 2 or 4 steps, but let's go ahead and try 2, and then we'll fix it if need be. But to kind of have something like this, and we'll make sure we quantize this as well. I'll probably just use 4 steps. I think that sounds a little bit more natural. But that 3 steps actually sounded really good. So if you guys want to switch it up and do 3 steps, that actually might sound even better than what I initially did. But anyway, so this is kind of what I had. So I had basically just one more hat to add, and I kind of wanted to throw this one in. This is the HH light, and I wanted to just kind of throw this one in between notes, just to kind of add, you know, just different little groove in there slightly. So I kind of did these in between these, so it kind of goes from this note up to this. Then I added it over here, and that's pretty much it. So let's go ahead and quantize that as well. So this is kind of the groove we start with. And then from there, I actually added the snares, and I just realized I actually have the wrong snare in here, so I want to just go ahead and change that real quick. This is the other snare I used, so I used SD Station 1 and SD Wheels, and this was the main snare, and then I used the SD Wheels as kind of just a little extra little snare, and they just kind of changed the pattern a little bit, so kind of like this. So I kind of we just turn that down slightly. And I'm gonna just quantize one snare and leave the other one directly on the grid. So we have one that's slightly off the grid, one that's directly on the grid first, to kind of just thicken up the sound a little bit. And then also just, I feel like personally, I feel like it's not something you'll kind of hear a lot, but it's just something that you kind of notice that slight groove, especially I guess if you're a producer. I always notice when the snares are slightly kind of staggered. So that's something I'll do if I'm using a snare and a clap, quantize one, leave the other, or I just won't quantize the snares at all and quantize all the other different sounds like the kick and all that other stuff. So just kind of leave the snare directly where it is and have everything kind of bouncing around it. But anyway, so once I had that, I wanted to go ahead and add the kick. So I'm just using BD Basic from the same kit that I told you guys earlier about, the Legends Never Die kit. And we're going to go ahead and just do a very, very simple pattern. Nothing you guys haven't heard before. It's kind of like this. Okay, and then we're gonna go ahead and Alt and Q, so basically just quantize that again. And usually, actually, when I quantize kicks, unless it's something that's super kind of backpack or somewhere I want a lot of variation in the velocities, I don't really like my kicks kind of bouncing that much as far as the velocities goes. So I'll usually turn the velocity tab all the way down to 0 when I'm doing kicks, unless I actually want that. So just a quick tip, and then I'll usually just turn them all the way up. But let's go ahead and see what that sounds like now. Okay, so we have a nice little bounce to it, and now for any of the transition effects, it's obviously gonna sound a little bit rough, but this is kind of what the beat comes in as. And let me just go ahead and activate this parametric EQ again. Okay, so it's a good start, has that kind of cool little laid back bounce. So let's jump into the next section and continue working on this. So once I had that, the next thing I wanted to add was just a couple little other elements. I have this cymbal, which is cymbal fruit, just a nice little 808 crash. So I'm going to use that on the 1. And then over here, we're going to do our little reverse crash just as a little transition piece before we add our other little effects riser later. So just do something like this. So it just kind of leads into it. And then I have this little casino hat. This is actually from an unreleased bank, and it's just a nice, more lo-fi kind of old school hat. And I just kind of wanted to add that in there just to kind of not make it as trappy, or just have some elements of a more kind of old school vibe to it. So I just wanted to add this hat pretty simply in here, nothing too crazy. Basically just 2 notes, and I'll just go ahead and quantize those. And for this, actually, we want to turn the velocity up, so whatever it's going to do, it's going to do. And we'll turn down here if we need be. But basically, this is kind of how the track comes in. And then I basically just made this beat for a tutorial, so the actual sequencing of this is going to be just real simple, but obviously if you want to sequence it for a full beat, after that part you would go ahead and drop into the verse part, but we're going to go ahead and drop into the change up. Before we do any of that, we still want to add our 808 to that, so let's jump in the next section and do that real quick. So now it's time to add the 808. I'm using 808 Fort from the Legends Never Die kit, and the first thing I'm going to do is just go ahead and right click, edit, detect pitch regions, just see what the root note is. So it's just G. So I'll just come in here into miscellaneous functions, go up to G, and just right click over G. And what that allows you to do is just really play that this is how we do melody anytime you want. Do that basically all day now once you do that. But the other thing I want to do with it is I want to go ahead and just basically I want to go ahead and truncate it first, so it'll cut off when I need it to, and then I'm going to go ahead and just basically lay down a simple little 808 pattern with it. So what I'm going to do is I didn't really go too crazy with this. I just kind of used the root note for the most part, but you could switch it up to other notes that are in key, and basically just kind of added in a pattern like this. So I had this basically, and then I'm going to go ahead and quantize this as well, just because there's points that's going to be hitting with the kick, so I want to make sure that they're going to be in sync and not hitting kind of offbeat or just slightly out of sync. And basically now when you add all this together, this is kind of what we end up with. So basically over here is the section where we're going to have that little drop that I was telling you guys about. So let's go ahead and jump in the next section and kind of work on that. So the next thing I want to do is just add this little cowbell sound, just kind of give it that cushion OJ type vibe. That kind of sound was used all throughout there. So let's go ahead and just click on edit and detect pitch region. So it's just the F. So all you have to do is just come in here, go to your F, and just right click over it. to give yourself the right note. And then basically all we're going to do is just use it for 2 notes right here at the end, and we're going to just take them up to the C sharp. Just kind of have something like that. And then we're going to go ahead and take this to the effects channel. You guys didn't hear that well just because this parametric EQ is still on, but this is what it sounds like. It's basically just the cowbell you guys are all used to. And on effects channel 4, we're going to go ahead and just add a slight delay to this, but we're going to make this one slightly quicker. So just 2 steps, turn it down, and pan it. So we have that. And we'll just kind of add that as a little accent piece throughout the track. Right here. Kind of do something like that with it. And then on pattern 8, we're going to go ahead and just add this little riser. Just kind of have our transition effect. So I'm going to be using the FX Cardo-esque riser. And we're going to just go in here, use the root note. Kind of do something like that just to give ourselves a nice little transition effect, and make sure that we take that off effects channel 2. And what I'm going to do real quick is I'm just going to go ahead and turn the delay on it off, and then I'm going to go ahead and just turn this little tail release down just so it kind of cuts off quicker. Okay, so it just kind of cuts off as soon as it's kind of let go. Turn that down a good amount. So we have something like this now. Let me just turn this effect on. And I'm just kind of adjusting the timing on that just to make sure it kind of sounds good to me and not awkward. Just because I was kind of holding it too long, so it kind of didn't have anywhere to go. So you kind of had it just sitting there at the end for a little bit, which I kind of felt like took away from its purpose a little bit. So I want to just change it up slightly, just to make sure it kind of fits in there a little bit better. So let's go ahead and take a listen to the beat one more time. Okay, so basically from there, the only other sound that I added to this was basically from this 808 kit. I just used this little blip type sound, just kind of as like an ambient type snare on this next little section. I just thought that sounded good, so I thought that would be kind of just a cool little piece to kind of transition it into, to where it has just kind of more of an ambient type vibe over here, and then it has more of that full type vibe you get from the beat when it first kind of comes in. So it kind of goes from And then I think just the only other thing I kind of added was just this little bell, excuse me, not the bell sound, but this little hi-hat sound. And I kind of just did a little pattern like this, where I just chopped them kind of real quick, as kind of like a little transition piece. And they just kind of play over here to kind of transition it back to the parts that have drums. And that's pretty much the beat. So you kind of have that laid back, airy type vibe that Cushion OJ had. But like I told you guys earlier, I still wanted to kind of add one more little element to it that I thought kind of would just be interesting and make it a little bit more modern. So let's jump in the next section. I want to show you guys a little vocal chop that I added to this. So basically, once I had the beat done for the most part, the last thing that I kind of wanted to add was this little vocal patch. And as I had the beat done, I kind of always have a tendency to just kind of go through all my little vocal packs and just kind of see if anything fits. So this is actually from a vocal pack that will be dropping within the next 2 weeks at studiosounds.com. And as I was going through this pack, this particular sound actually seemed to fit in here. So I have it on Effects Channel 5, and I have a couple different effects in here. I have a parametric EQ. Let's go ahead and turn those off for now, and I'll show you guys their purpose in a second. But basically, I just want to normalize it. I want to go ahead and just trim it all the way to the right. And we want to make sure we set this to generic, and we want to turn this all the way up. Now, when you guys listen to this track, you guys will see how this sound, it almost has a weird kind of almost, it's basically slightly off beat, but for some reason in this beat I didn't want it to be super perfect and everything to be super on chop, you know, so everything just be super on the grid. So I didn't really mind it. But basically, once I added to the track, this is kind of what it sounded like before I did anything to it. So I thought that didn't sound too bad, but I wanted to be slightly kind of just slightly more ambient, slightly pushed to the back. So I put a parametric EQ on it, and let's go ahead and actually just kind of take a listen to that part, and we'll kind of put this EQ on there, just kind of get rid of the frequencies we don't need. Okay, so that doesn't sound too bad. And then we have this delay. I'm going to go ahead and set this to 2 steps, so it's just a quicker delay. I have the volume set down, the panning to the left, and the ping pong on, just so it'll bounce from speaker to speaker. And then the very last thing I have on it is just a really heavy reverb, just kind of give it that ambient washed out sound that everything else has. And this will be kind of a sound that kind of plays in the background, just catches your ear a little bit, but isn't supposed to be a super kind of focal point of the track at all. But when we kind of add everything together, this is kind of what the final product sounds like.